When people talk about driving games from the PlayStation 2 era, a few familiar names always come up. Of course, you have Gran Turismo, you have Burnout, Need for Speed, and even Ridge Racer. But hidden among Namco's catalogue during the mid-2000s is a game that hardly anyone outside of Japan even knows exists. A strange experiment that quietly released in 2005 and then basically disappeared. Welcome to the Worst Racing Games, the internet series where you guys suggest different racing games that you think are terrible, then I play them, review them, and rank them. So last week we had the strange DS port of Ford Racing 3, and this week the Racing Wheel has bestowed upon us a game called Critical Velocity. It never left Japan, it never received an official English translation, and it launched at the exact moment the industry was shifting towards high-definition consoles like the Xbox 360, which makes what Namco attempted here even more surprising, because Critical Velocity is not a traditional arcade racer at all. Instead of closed circuits and lap times, it's an open-world driving game with story missions, destructible environments, multiple districts, and a surprisingly demanding driving model. In some ways, it almost feels like Namco experimenting with ideas that other studios wouldn't fully explore until years later. So today we're taking a look at this obscure PS2 oddity, what it is, how it plays, why it even exists, and why it might be one of the most interesting forgotten racing games, doesn't have to be good, but interesting, that Namco ever made. So to get a better idea of what Critical Velocity is, we kind of have to look at where Namco was at the time. In the mid-2000s, Namco's racing identity was of course dominated by Ridge Racer. That series had defined their arcade style since the early 1990s. Smooth drifting, neon tracks, fast and somewhat approachable racing. By 2005, however, Namco was releasing Ridge Racer 6 for the Xbox 360, one of the earliest HD racers of the new generation. But if you actually look at Ridge Racer 6 closely, it was pretty safe. Mechanically, it wasn't drastically different from earlier Ridge Racer games, it was essentially the same formula just running in HD. Meanwhile, over on the PS2, the supposedly older outgoing console, Namco released something far stranger: Critical Velocity. Instead of sticking to circuit racing, they built a fully explorable city, complete with districts, missions, side quests, traffic, and a loose story campaign. It's the kind of design decision you might expect from a brand new franchise, not a quiet Japan-only PS2 release, and yet, here it is. So let's talk about the premise of Critical Velocity. So in the game you play as a group known as the Stormers. They're essentially a team of vigilante drivers who assist the police department of a fictional city called Prio City. Or Prio, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Think of it as a mix between street racers and emergency response drivers. Instead of simply competing in races, your role is to take on missions across the city, like chasing criminals, performing stunts, rescuing civilians, and navigating some somewhat dangerous environments. There is a story tying everything together, delivered through dialogue and mission briefings. Unfortunately, because the game never received a translation, the narrative was somewhat difficult to follow, unless of course you spoke Japanese. Honestly, that's not really the point though. However, I think there was something wrong with my emulated version because all the cutscenes looked horrible. I'm not going to show you an actual clip because it's very flashy, so I'll just share a single screenshot. So for the sake of fairness, and so you can see how kind of impressive the models and cutscenes were, here's a clip from one of the cutscenes that I've pulled from YouTube. Anyway, the story's not really the point anyway because it's basically there as context for the missions, and those missions are where Critical Velocity really starts to show its personality. So the game contains 26 main story missions, each set somewhere within the city or surrounding regions. At first, the playable area is limited to a relatively small part of Prio City. This opening district feels like a fairly typical urban environment. Tight streets, narrow alleys, intersections filled with traffic. Early missions revolve around simple objectives, chasing vehicles, reaching destinations under time limits, and basic pursuit scenarios. And at this stage, I'll be honest, the game doesn't really make a great first impression, because all the early missions feel predictable, the environments are a bit repetitive, and if you were just judging this game based on the first hour or two, you might assume it's just another mid-tier PS2 driving game. But then something interesting happens. The map starts to expand. So what begins as a fairly contained urban driving space gradually opens into a surprisingly varied world, and this is where critical velocity really begins to shine. Outside the city centre, you eventually unlock entirely new regions. There's a desert zone filled with massive jumps and stunt opportunities, a movie studio backlot complete with artificial environments and film sets, an airport, a forest area, and eventually a resort district. Each area feels like it was designed around specific mission concepts. The desert emphasizes stunt driving, the forest pushes precision handling, and the airport opens up opportunities for high-speed chases. And these changing environments dramatically improve the pacing of the game. What started as a somewhat plain urban driving experience suddenly becomes a varied playground of some really cool mission design. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of racing games or retro games, then why not consider hitting that subscribe button and tapping that bell to stay up to date with my future uploads. And whilst you're at it, if you want to be the first to know about all my upcoming projects or just come and chat about some cool games, then why not join my Discord server using the link in the description below. We also do occasional giveaways there. Anyway, as the map expands, the missions themselves also become a bit more creative. Early on, as I mentioned, you'll mostly be chasing targets or racing against time. But later missions start introducing some weirder objectives, shall we say. For example, you might be tasked with filming a stunt movie, performing precise jumps and maneuvers for a production crew. It was at this point where I kind of thought, okay, Critical Velocity, I'm listening, you have my attention. There was one particularly memorable chase that ends in a multi-story parking structure where you pursue a suspect up floor after floor of cramped ramps before escaping the building. These missions transform Critical Velocity from a simple driving game into something closer to a vehicle action game. You're not just racing, you're kind of improvising and adapting to these unpredictable environments that the game throws at you, and trying to survive situations that feel more like action movie set pieces than traditional racing events. And that's a lot of fun. Another surprisingly strong element of this game is the vehicle selection. Unlike many arcade races where cars differ mainly in top speed, the vehicles in Critical Velocity actually feel meaningfully distinct. Some cars accelerate quickly but struggle at higher speeds, others are built for stability and grip on winding roads, some handle well off-road, while others are clearly designed for urban pursuit. And whilst I didn't experiment with loads of vehicles during my playthrough because I opted to spend money on upgrades, just seeing that variety was impressive by itself. And that variety becomes important in the later missions because if you do choose a wrong vehicle, it can make a challenge nearly impossible. You might attempt a mission several times before realizing that the real solution is just changing your car.
Change your car. You've got a problem. Change your fucking car.
And that kind of strategic choice adds a layer of depth that you don't always see in arcade-style driving games. The game also features a nitrous boost system, but it's not quite the standard press button to go faster mechanic you might expect. Instead, the game rewards dangerous driving. Performing near misses with oncoming traffic fills your nitrous gauge. Weaving through tight spaces and narrowly avoiding collisions generates boost energy. It's a system reminiscent of the design philosophy behind games like Thrill Drive, where risky driving becomes the core mechanic. And we'd later see that a lot in Burnout as well. But the balance here is interesting. You're rewarded for danger, but not excessively. The nitrous meter fills gradually, meaning you can't rely on infinite boosts, which means you have to master drifting, positioning, and some very careful traffic navigation. The result is a gameplay style that encourages calculated aggression. Drive boldly, but don't get reckless. And speaking of the traffic in this game is surprisingly hostile. Cars don't politely stay out of your way, they appear at intersections at exactly the wrong moments. They'll block lanes and drift into your path, and when you're chasing a target vehicle, the AI seems to deliberately weaponize traffic against you. Suspects will dart into oncoming lanes, they'll swerve through intersections filled with cars, and they'll lead you straight into the worst possible situations. It creates a sense that the city itself is working against you, which might sound frustrating, and at moments it definitely is, but it also makes successful pursuits incredibly satisfying, because when you finally thread your way through chaos at high speed, you feel like you've genuinely earned it. Now, one of the more interesting aspects of this game is its driving physics. If you're expecting something like Ridge Racer's effortless driving, well, you might be very surprised. The handling here is heavier, and I would say more deliberate. Cars feel weighty, momentum matters, you can't just slide through every corner without consequences. Precision becomes, well, very important, and collisions are punishing. Objects in the environment are less forgiving than you might expect from an arcade racer, and as a result, driving fast does require some actual thinking. You'll often pause the game to bring up the map and think about your route during a mission, which is something you rarely do in open world races. In a strange way, Critical Velocity feels like a bridge between arcade racing and something much more tactical. Looking back now, it's hard not to compare Critical Velocity to later open world driving games, particularly Burnout Paradise, which released in 2008. Paradise turned open world driving into a seamless playground of high-speed chaos. But of course, its design philosophy was very different. Burnout Paradise emphasized constant flow and instant gratification. Crash through billboards, boost endlessly, destroy traffic without consequence. Critical Velocity takes almost the opposite approach. Speed is dangerous, crashes are costly, and traffic is something to avoid, not something to smash through. The result is a driving experience that feels much more tense and deliberate. It's not about carefree destruction, it's about controlled, careful speed. And then there's one moment in the game that kinda blindsided me. Late in the resort area missions, you'll eventually reach a beachside road called Sunny Beach. At first it seems like just another scenic environment, palm trees, ocean views, coastal highways, but then the mission leads you across a bridge and suddenly something looks very familiar. The road curves in a particular way, and the environment starts to resemble something from Namco's past. And then it hit me. I was driving on Seaside Route 765, one of the most iconic tracks in Ridge Racer history. It's not labelled as such, there's no dramatic reveal, but the layout is definitely unmistakable. It's a cool cameo and a hidden piece of fan service for longtime Namco racing fans. And if you recognise it mid-mission, it was genuinely quite mind-blowing, to be honest. Another thing worth noting is that Critical Velocity can become very difficult. The second half of the game ramps up the challenge significantly. Targets drive more aggressively, routes become more complex, and missions often demand near-perfect driving. Combined with the heavy handling model and hostile traffic, it can feel brutal at times, but for players who enjoy mastering demanding driving mechanics, that challenge becomes part of the appeal. This is not a casual racing game because it expects you to learn the city, learn the cars, and constantly refine your driving technique. Now for me, one of the biggest mysteries surrounding this game is why it never left Japan, because mechanically it feels like a game that could have appealed to a much wider audience. But the timing probably worked against it. 2005 was the moment when the industry's attention shifted toward next generation hardware. The 360 launched that same year, the PS3 was right around the corner. Publishers were focusing their marketing on HD next-gen experiences. Releasing a niche open-world racer on the aging PS2 probably didn't seem like a great international investment, especially one with a heavy story component that would require translation. So Critical Velocity stayed in Japan and slowly faded into obscurity. Now of course, being a PS2 title, the visuals were limited by the hardware. The city isn't as detailed as later open world games, character models are somewhat simple but in the cutscenes they look really good. The textures are sometimes repetitive, but the sense of scale is still impressive, and the car models look quite nice. Prio City and its surrounding regions feel large enough to support the mission structure, and a variety of environments helps keep the experience visually interesting. The soundtrack, meanwhile, leans into electronic and driving-focused tracks typical of Namco racers. It's energetic, atmospheric, and fits the tone of the game nicely. In fact, audio-wise, the game is pretty solid, to be honest with you. Anyway, so now the time has come to rank Critical Velocity on our worst racing games tier list. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I had a lot of fun with this game. The open world map is a lot of fun, the small bits I could gather from the story seem goofy and fun, the driving is challenging but rewarding, and I just really enjoy the whole design of the game. Is it perfect? No. Is it sometimes way too difficult? Yes. But for me, this game's going to sit in actually not that bad. It's not going right at the top next to Road Trip Adventure, it's going near at the bottom side with Ford v Chevy. But I still think this is a good game, and especially if you're a fan of Ridge Racer, you should definitely check this game out. Critical Velocity is not a perfect game, and it takes some time to get interesting, with the early missions being repetitive. But if you stick with it long enough to see the map expand and the missions evolve, something special starts to emerge. It's a driving game that values precision over spectacle, planning over chaos, and skill over destruction. It's not trying to be Ridge Racer, and it's definitely not trying to be Burnout, but it still has just a teensy tiny bit of that Ridge Racer DNA. Instead, though, it occupies a strange middle ground between arcade racing and open world vehicle action. And that uniqueness is exactly what makes it worth revisiting today. And so that takes us to the end of our look at Critical Velocity, and with it, this week's episode of Worst Racing Games. Let me know in the comments down below, have you played this game, are you going to go check it out now, and would you rank it any differently? And as always, if you have a suggestion you want to see on the wheel, pop that down below as well. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, please consider hitting that subscribe button and tapping the bell for notifications. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thank you and goodbye.